All right, so what's a transformer? Well, short answer, this is a transformer, right? This is what one looks like. So I have taken this and I've cut the top off, right? And this came from a microwave that one of our other teachers thought she lost, but in reality I took it apart. So if you see Miss Thomas, don't tell her, right? But it's basically this big block, right? And it was welded on and I cut it off, right? So when I take it off, you can see the insides, right? And so a transformer basically consists of two coils. So here's one coil that I've taken apart a few times, right? And then here's the primary coil, right? So a transformer is basically just two coils that have this big metal iron, I should say, block between them. And that's what's used to make these magnetic fields interact with each other, right? So I have a primary side, I have a secondary side, and notice the difference in the number of windings. So if you look at my primary coil is really thick wire and it's less turns, but my secondary coil, this is this really thin wire, right? And so there's a lot of coils, and I don't know what the exact number is. I know this is probably about 300 coils. I want to say, that's probably a few thousand at least, because this wire is so thin and it's really thick, right? But the whole idea of a transformer is I can take a voltage, put it in this primary coil, and it will transform, right? Hence the name transformer, transform the voltage into a different voltage in the secondary coil, and it also changes the current, right? So let's look at how to figure out the relationship between the number of coils and the voltage and the current. So this is basically what a transformer looks like, right? There's this metal core, and in this case, a lot of times we draw like in textbooks and stuff like a square, but basically it's some sort of ferromagnetic core, and there's two coils wrapped around it, right? And so, again, in this case, you can see the two coils. In the example I showed you, right, the coils were stacked on top of each other, but either way, in practice, it's going to be the same thing, right? So there's an AC source right here, and remember, AC current is when the current goes back and forth at some frequency. So if you think about what's going to happen here, right, this AC source is going to start pushing current maybe like this way, right, at the beginning. And so that current's going to come through this coil. And when that current goes through that coil, because of the right-hand rule, it's going to create a magnetic field. And so let's just call it the magnetic field is going to point up, right? So this coil creates a magnetic field pointing up. Okay, so the point of this core is that this core is going to amplify that field and kind of move it to the other coil, right? So this field that's created in here is going to flow, or I should say point this way, right? And it's going to go all the way around, right? Because magnetic fields create closed loops because there's no such thing as magnetic monopoles, right? So this coil creates this field going this way, right? And because this coil over here on the other side isn't connected to anything, it had no flux at the beginning, right? So when you turn this coil on, it creates this field. This field starts pushing through this coil. That's a change in flux, right? And that leads us to Faraday's law. And Faraday's law says that if there's a change in flux through a closed loop, there's going to be an induced current, an induced EMF that produces a current that creates a field to oppose the change, right? So what happens is this coil over here is going to induce a magnetic field. Let me draw it a different color. It's going to induce a field that opposes that, right? So inside there, it's going to induce a field that points up, which means this current is, it's going to be backwards from what it was before. So maybe it's going to point this way, right? So that's when the AC is pushing one way. Okay, but remember, this is AC, so it's going to flip, right? So before, the current was going this way, creating a field up, right? So now this current flips. Current flips, field flips. So now the field's pointing down. So now all these magnetic field lines are pointing the opposite way. That means over here, again, there's a change in flux. Change in flux is going to induce an EMF that opposes that change, right? So now when this thing flips and the magnetic field's going the other way, this coil is going to induce its own magnetic field against that change. And now the current's going to go this way. So you can see what's going to happen. The AC over here is going to keep changing the current. That creates a magnetic field that changes. That magnetic field that changes creates a flux that changes inside that coil. And that's how a transformer works. It's really pretty ingenious. So how do we solve for a transformer? Transformers are really easy, right? So there's a primary side and there's a secondary side. So this is the primary side and this is my secondary side. And it doesn't matter which side you call primary and secondary, right? Usually just whatever side's hooked up to the source is primary. So the way this works is through Faraday's law, right? So I can say for the primary side, the voltage that's induced on the primary side equals the number of coils on the primary side times d phi dt, or the rate of change of flux. And I can also say the same for the secondary side. So on the secondary side, the voltage on the secondary coil is equal to the number of coils on the secondary coil times d phi dt for the secondary coil, right? The rate of change of flux. Okay, so in this case, d phi dt is going to be the same for both of these coils. So I can say d phi dt is the same for both of these, right? So I can set these two things equal to each other, calling d phi dt the same, right? So if I solve both these equations for d phi dt, this would be primary over the number of primary coils. That equals this d phi dt, right? And I can do the same thing over here. So secondary voltage divided by the number of secondary coils equals that. Then I can set these two things equal to each other. And so now let's make this a little useful. Put all my voltages on one side and my number of coils on the other side. So if I divide Vs over, right, and I multiply primary over, I can end up with my primary voltage divided by my secondary voltage equals my number of coils on the primary coil divided by the number of secondary coils on the secondary side, right? So it's just a proportion. So the ratio of the number of coils on the primary to secondary is going to be the same as the ratio of the voltage on the primary to the secondary. Okay, so what about current? So current, right, I know that P equals IV, right? And because of conservation of energy, the power produced on one side's got to be the same as the power produced on the other side, right? It can't be any different. For a transformer, I mean, it could be less, but transformers are really efficient, right? So I can say that power on both sides is going to be the same. So I can say that my primary current times my primary voltage equals my secondary current times my secondary voltage, right? Using P equals IV. So again, let's try to get this in terms of primary over secondary, right? So if I divide secondary over, I get primary over, secondary, and I can divide primary over, so I secondary divided by I primary. Now it's in terms of that, so I can come add it to my proportion. So this is equal to secondary over primary, right? So there's my relationships for a transformer, right? The number of coils, the ratio primary to secondary, it's directly related to the voltage, but it's opposite of the current, right? So here, the primary to secondary ratio is equal to the ratio of the secondary to the primary. So what that means is, over here where I increased my voltage, that's actually going to decrease the current, because here, my secondary is higher than my primary, so that means over here, my primary current has to be higher than my secondary current, right, in order to make these ratios work out. Okay, so the two types of transformers are step-up transformer and a step-down transformer. A step-up transformer is exactly what it says. You're going to increase the number of coils, right? So for a step-up transformer, the secondary number of coils is greater than the number of primary coils, right? So this is an example of a step-up transformer. My number of secondary coils is larger than my primary, which means the secondary voltage is going to be greater than the primary voltage. But the trade-off is my current is going to decrease because my voltage increased, right? Because P equals IV, power has to be the same. Okay, it's exactly the opposite for a step-down transformer. So for a step-down transformer, the number of primary coils is greater than the number of secondary coils, right? So if I flip the source over to here and I call this my primary, I have more coils on the primary than the secondary. So that means my coils on the secondary are less than my primary. My voltage on the secondary is also going to be less than my voltage on the primary, right? So on a step-down transformer, I'm getting less coils, which means I'm getting less voltage. But the trade-off is my voltage decreases because my current increases, right? And so depending on what you want out of your AC source, you can either want to step up the voltage or maybe you want to step up the current, right? So how you want to change it is what leads you to whether you use a step-up transformer or a step-down transformer, right? So transformers are really pretty simple. It's just ratios. And then if you remember what step-up, step-down, if you can remember the number of coils, then the whole relationship between voltage and current is pretty easy, right? So step-up transformers are useful, right, if you want to take something and make it high voltage, right, which seems like that have a lot of uses. But when would you want a step-down transformer, besides if you're trying to lower voltage? Well, the outcome of current increases can be really useful for something. So let me show you one little example of how you can take a step-down transformer and make it something pretty cool. Okay, so let me show you something fun you can do with a transformer, right? So if you happen to steal another teacher's microwave and she thinks it's lost and she's looking for it and you just don't tell her, right? You can open up the microwave and you can pull out this microwave oven transformer, right? And there's lots of cool stuff you can do with it. But if, for instance, you were to take this thing out and remove the secondary coil and leave the primary coil, right? So the thicker one. And then I'm going to take that primary coil, right? And what I want to do is I want to make a step-down transformer. So I want to wrap another coil up here because I want to get something with big current, small voltage, right? So what I'm going to do is, let's go like super extreme. I'm going to use some welding cable, right? Here's some welding cable that I took off of something else. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to wrap a secondary coil with this welding cable. All right, so I'm going to stick this in here. All right, there we go. So notice I have my primary coil down here and I left some little terminals so I can plug this into a suicide cable, right? And my secondary coil, if you notice, it's only like 1 3/4 turns, right? So this is going to be a serious step-down transformer. And so what's going to happen is I plug this into 120 volts. This is only 1 3/4 turns, right? So this is going to get a huge step down in voltage. But because of P equals IV, I'm going to get a huge step up in current. So to make this work, I got to put this top back on, right, to keep the magnetic field like all in there, right? So let me take this and put this back on. I'm going to try to, eventually I'll epoxy this, but I'm just going to clamp it for right now. Clamps can never have enough clamps. All right, let's go test this thing out. All right, so let's try this out. I have my aptly named suicide cord, right, which is basically just an electrical outlet that I cut and put some connectors on, right? This is a terrible idea, by the way. Don't try this at home, kids. So we'll put this on power supply, right? And I have it off so I don't kill myself. And then let me come back here. I'm going to connect these to my primary coil. All right. Well, keep these separate. And here goes nothing. Now, I'm going to put some safety squints on too. All right, here we go. Don't die. Damn, that's loud. So, look at my voltage. It's only about 1.5 volts, right? But the current is going to be crazy. So let's try it out again. Should be heating up. Oh yeah, look. It's starting to turn red hot. There's a crazy current going through this right now. You can see that part on the end. It's turning red hot and it melted my terminals. Right? But I think you can see making a step down transformer like this, right? I stepped down the number of coils, but I got a crazy ass current there. Physics rules.